Every January, some of the world's biggest names in business and politics get together in small Swiss town Davos. And in this gathering, World Economic Forum, this year once again, they produced lots of interesting discussions on challenges the world community faces. So we'll talk about them today, adding Korea's perspective in this program, Upfront.
Renowned figures from political and financial worlds have gathered to discuss the current economic situation facing global society. This year's forum discussed various risk factors that hinders the global economy, which include terrorist attacks that shock the entire world, as well as the refugee issues that have made the most headlines, along with the Syria crisis. Climate change, which has been announced as one of the biggest risk factors to the global economy, was also discussed at the forum. One of the main pillars of the forum this year is mastering the fourth industrial revolution. It is to discuss the overall impact of the digital technology development on the global economy. The international community has paid attention to the World Economic Forum Annual Meeting 2016 as the global leaders from all around the world have also gathered for discussions, including British Prime Minister David Cameron and U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. A lot of prominent figures like UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, World Bank President Kim Yong-kim, heads of the international organizations and CEOs of global companies have joined the big event. Chae Kyung-hwan of the ruling Saenuri Party also participated in the forum as a special presidential envoy and joined a session, Regions in Transformation East Asia, discussing the economies in East Asia as well as the world economy. Also, a lot of other domestic figures, including Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon, and heads of companies have joined the forum and had discussions with other global leaders. Amid the rising concerns over the global economy, World Economic Forum has contributed to finding a new growth engine for global businesses, including innovative technology. Such efforts are expected to boost the development of the global financial market in the near future.
For our discussion today, we have three panel members, starting with Professor Kim In-chul, Economics Professor Emeritus of Sungkyunkwan University, and also the former president of the Korean Economic Association. Thank you very much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
And also Professor Cho Sung-zoon of Seoul National University. He is the chair of the Big Data Subcommittee in the Government 3.0 Committee of Korea. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Professor Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Professor Jun-sok, you are some of the one of the experts of WEF here in Korea. You know, in Arirang TV, we've been running many shows, programs on this topic, and we are one of the 15 media partners of WEF here. But upfront, just like our program says, we wanted to make it clear, perhaps WEF is one of the leaders of this forum industry, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, WEF publishes an annual competitiveness report, and to go along with this report, they decided to have a forum to discuss various issues that's being discussed in the competitiveness report, which includes technology, government policy, various different aspects of competitiveness. And the WEF has, because they've been publishing the competitive report the longest, and they started this forum the earliest, I think they're getting a lot of press. Also, one of their strokes of geniuses is that they not only invite policy and economics, business people, but they also invite politicians, rock stars like Bono of U2. So that tends to get a lot of press.
Great strategy that makes WEF as the leader of this very, these days, competitive industry, by the way. There are lots of players all around the world. So we happen to be covering one of them because they offer interesting and important discussions. So let's talk about the forum this year. Professors, what do you think were some of your most important forums that really caught your eyes, for instance? What do you think was most interesting to you?
Well, as you see, there were more than 300 sessions, so
Right.
I could not follow up many. But there are several agendas that impressed me quite a bit. I took interest in such agendas as the digital transformation of industries and the transformation of East Asia and global economic environment, etc.
Right. The global economic environment, the change of it is kind of like a perennial topic, I suppose, but this technology thing is something new in a way. What do you think, Professor Cho Sung-zoon, in your observation, overall view, what were some of the interesting sessions for you?
For me, the fourth industrial revolution is the most impressive topic.
That was their main theme this time, right?
Right. Of course, refugee crisis and China's economic downturn and global warming, etc., are all very important topics. But the fourth revolution is the most impressive and most profound because that affects the people all over the world.
True.
No matter where you live and no matter what you do for a living. And it'll affect our future generation significantly. So that's the topic that I found most impressive.
And our expert on WEF, Professor Yang, your overall view, we'll talk a lot about this main theme later on, but other topics that you thought really mattered.
Okay, well, I think this particular forum had two big points. One is they all feed into each other, but the current low growth environment, and they tackle that not only globally but also regionally. So they had a session on East Asia also, and then looking at it more globally in the long term, the fourth industrial revolution is a part of it. But I think the bigger conversation here is the low growth a permanent aspect of the global economy? And their answer is resounding no. I'm not quite convinced of that personally, but that's the main point I think they're trying to get across.
I think that's a very important point indeed, because I thought the overall global consensus is that the slowing growth is a new normal these days. So, in your recollection, what were they saying in terms of saying no to this pessimism?
Okay, well, there's been a big conversation in growth theory lately about whether the technology growth, which is which has been the engine of growth for the last 200 years or so, is slowing down. Now, if you look at the economic theory, if the technology growth slows down, then so will the global economic growth. Now, some people are claiming that the technology growth is sustaining and it's accelerating. But others are beginning to say that it's slowing down. So there has been a lot of interesting conversations between the two parties, and the WEF in this point is just saying very strongly that they believe that the growth will accelerate, not slow down.
Professor Kim In-chul, isn't WEF kind of like what some of the critics call the center of Washington consensus, always sending positive messages and always on the side of the producers and business? So in that regard, if that is true, I don't know whether you take that idea to your heart or not. Isn't it their kind of like don't they have the reputation to produce all this kind of positive perspective all the time? Or what's your perspective on the topic that Professor Yang just mentioned? Maybe global economy is not really slowing down when they were saying that. Do you buy that?
Well, it depends how you look at it. I mean, because depending on the person's, attitudes towards the reality, I think he is right in the sense that the technology advancement is the engine of growth. So as we look at the the speed of development of technology, we don't need to be, that much pessimistic. But I'm not quite sure, whether the Washington, consensus is deeply involved or related to, World Economic Forum. But as you see, it has been organized. Been running the forum has been running over 45 or 60 years. So it dealt with so many different topics. So it doesn't have to be just confining to a narrow topic such as the Washington consensus.
Right. good balancing act right here. Thank you very much. And talking about the WEF's contribution to the global economy as a whole, first of all, one of the things that we can think about is important the policymakers. You talked about rock stars as well, but important policymakers and politicians join as well. For instance, I believe former Deputy Prime Minister of Economy, Choi Kyung-won, was also the special envoy or a representative of the government joining the forum and so on. What can we say in terms of forums like this? As we mentioned, this is not the only single forum, but forums like this making contribution for the world economy. How do they do that? What can we see here?
Okay, well, I think part of what they do is they bring the influential people together informally. So they don't, because they don't have actual policies that are being discussed, I think the conversation tends to be freer and there tends to be more exchange of ideas. So it can set up policy-related, more concrete meetings in the future, but for now it's just exchanging ideas, trying to see how things should go, and having a lot of other representatives from the other areas, rock stars being part of them, but more importantly, consumer agencies, the NGOs from various parts of the world, having them all together and trying to get their information exchanged with each other. I think that it does form a constructive purpose.
Professor Cho Sung-zoon, would you agree with that perspective? Even in your areas like industry and engineering and so on, did you find this year's forum, for instance, in Davos, making contribution in terms of forming consensus and shared understanding?
Yeah, I think it's a good forum that people can hear what the people in the other world, such as policymakers hear from technologists, what can be done, technologically speaking. And on the other hand, technologists hear what policymakers have sort of as their worries about technological advancement and especially disparity problem, which I mentioned later.
Right.
As we discussed earlier, the technological advance will definitely help economic growth. The problem is this current economic growth is not, I'm not sure if it'll be beneficial to everyone in the society because of the disparity problem. People who understand technology, who takes advantage of technology will definitely gain a lot, while those who are left behind, I'm not sure if they can enjoy the fruits of the economic advancement or economic growth.
So in that sense, it was meaningful that the world's leaders could get together there and to talk about those kind of concerns, sharing information and views and perspective and forming possible consensus. Another, if we may digress just a little bit on some of the important topics that they dealt with in Davos this time, talking about East Asia, the changes in East Asia, and the future of East Asia. I understand they talked about TPP and AIIB and so on. Any observation on their discussion on East Asia?
Yeah, first of all, the region of East Asia is just so huge, and so many countries with different economic conditions and cultural backgrounds. And of these countries, there are only 5 economies, such as Japan, and,
Korea, China,
Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, China, and Taipei, China.
Right.
These were the economies that have been successful, in terms of structural transformation. They try to transfer, they move from the agriculture, the low productivity region or sector to the high productive sector, to manufacturing sector.
Right.
But all the other regions in East Asia still, stagnated. So they have to look at these economies. So the leaders, the economists specializing in East Asian economies, they still try to, enlighten them and emphasize the importance of, moving from the agricultural sector to the industrial and services sector.
Right,
So that's where we need to focus.
Right. Indeed, it is a huge category of different
Yes.
topics that needs to be
Right.
covered on East Asia for sure, and they did a challenging work. Another thing I suppose we have to mention is one of the hottest topics in Davos this time, and the hottest topics all around the world is the refugee problem. Involuntary immigration, migration and stuff. That was their key concern here. Any observations on their discussion? Did we find anything new there, anything?
Well, I think they were concentrating more on the current European refugee problem.
Sure, right.
I think this shows sort of a bias of the WF because they are located, their headquarters is located in Europe.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's quite as big a problem elsewhere currently, but
the thing is, if Europe faces that kind of big migration challenge, that threatens European stability, the stability of the EU system, and that's a big concern for
global
economics.
economy, definitely.
Right.
But I think perhaps they were also trying to give some light to the idea that while it is currently a European problem, if some of these fourth industrial revolution type of measures go through, then there might be more refugee problems as the people from poorer countries try to become economic refugees to the richer countries. So they may be trying to use that indirectly.
Welcome, everybody. It's a great honor to be here with all of you to discuss the next steps in the climate agenda that we have because of the hard work of so many of the panelists. I'll introduce each of the panelists as we go forward, but first, I'd like to introduce our introductory speaker. Now, you know, at the end of every year, there's a poll of who had the best year and who had the worst year. And I think it'd be very hard to argue that anyone had a better year last year than Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon.
The SDGs and climate change must go together. SDG is ambitious, universal, integrated, and those two are indivisible. All 17 goals, including climate change, must go hand in hand. The Paris Agreement gives the private sector an unprecedented opportunity to create clean energy, climate-resilient economies.
My plea, stemming from the experiment of Paris, is that this special event with non-governmental actors has to take place at the same place and the same time as the COP. Because one of the reasons why we had such a success in Paris is that it was not only governments, obviously it was decided, but also private companies, but also local authorities, and also NGOs, and also civil society. And it's really decided that every single year in the future, in the COP, we have a special event where everybody can check what has been done and can propose for the future. If we implement that very ambitious program, things will go in the right direction. Thank you.
The technology is there if we want to share it, but we won't tackle inequality and we won't tackle climate if the world continues on a business as usual model. If the 1% have all the wealth, if the global trading models based on supply chains that continue to in fact attack human and labour rights and decry environmental standards, then nobody wins. So we will also use our capital. Not just will we demand dialogue from governments and corporations, but we will use our capital, $30 trillion of workers' capital, double that if you include our mutuals, invested in the global economy.
My ideal goal will be that everybody will run its business plan and its objectives along the Sustainable Development Goals, that we would actually publish our annual reports to show what contributions we make to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then that commission will look at creative partnerships, new business models, and the financing side. So I hope that certainly will create the momentum. But ultimately, we will be held accountable for what we obviously achieve, not for what we say. So we will be looking at clear measurements, transparency, accountability as we move this process forward.
Okay, let's get to the core of the WEF discussion here, as Professor Cho mentioned, the fourth industrial revolution here. First of all, how do we define the idea, Professor Cho, fourth industrial revolution? I guess the chair of WEF, the founder, introduced an article at Foreign Affairs magazine a little bit time before the economic forum, at the World Economic Forum, and he discussed some of the ideas. But do we have a clear understanding how to define the fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, I think it has many different components. So it's not easy to say this is the one technology that makes a difference. But in general, we talk about big data that is collected from sensors and mobile devices, and they are all connected with the internet, wireless and wired. So you get this huge data, and then the computers, we know nowadays how to train computers to become smart using that data. So for instance, the computer might understand my itinerary, regular itinerary during weekdays. I usually get up, I leave my home at certain time and go to my work and stay there for 7 hours, and then I go to somewhere in the evening and then finally go home. And the computers may understand and learn from my locational data and where I spend most of my time, etc. And so that is a kind of technological advance that can be used in many different forms of businesses.
So are you saying then we are making a movement or steps from big data towards, is it artificial intelligence? When computer actually knows where you go, what you do and stuff.
Right.
That's a step toward artificial intelligence.
Say just
right?
like if you have a secretary, assistant who follows you every moment of the day, that person knows your patterns, so to speak. And it is the computers nowadays can do the same job and then helps us and maybe sells something to us, everything.
I think there is a discussion about defining the fourth industrial revolution in terms of fusion or blurring boundaries between digital, physical, and biological world. So that's what Professor Cho has mentioned, I suppose, some of it. Professor Yang, you have something to add?
Well, the WEF, if you go to their websites, they mention 7 technologies that they're watching. And the first is computing, cloud, data storage capability. Second is big data. Third is digital health. So various digital equipment that we could use to monitor our health.
Right.
Fourth is digitization of matter, and they mostly concentrate seemingly on 3D printing. How easy it will be to make things, offloading the blueprint from the internet and printing it wherever you are. Fifth thing is the Internet of Things. Sixth is blockchain technology like Bitcoin. And seventh
what is that? Blockchain technology, what is that?
Okay, well, we've heard about Bitcoins.
Right.
But Bitcoin has 2 big points, one of which is the blockchain. Blockchain is a digital currency which records all its transactions.
I see.
And that's one of the features of Bitcoin, not the only feature, but one of the important features.
Okay.
And the WEF believes that such blockchain technology will not only speed up transaction, but also increase transparency of transactions.
Okay, I think that's good explanation there.
And
but,
the last technology they mentioned is wearable internet.
Wearable internet. So there is the blurring boundary between the physical or digital world on one hand and the biological world right there. Let's ask Professor Cho Sung-zoon about the third industrial revolution. Do we understand that as a kind of a computerization, digitalization of the economy as a whole?
Yes, as a third industrial revolution, yes, I think it's the introduction of computers, which made a huge impact. For instance, a lot of things became automated.
That's big, yeah.
For instance, we don't pay tolls. We don't have to pay tolls to humans. We just go through a certain lane, and the toll is automatically collected.
Right.
You see those people who used to collect money, cash, they are the number of them reduced, and everybody will agree that that trend will continue in the future, and so eventually there will be nobody who is going to collect the cash.
Even before we talk about those kind of traffic pass systems here, Professor Cho, I'm old enough to remember the time when computers were run with as input device the punch cards,
right?
And then there were tape, the recording tapes as a memory storage device, and there were time when there was no laser printers and stuff. But do we call that part also a part of third industrial revolution because we had computers then?
I think those people who call this current event as fourth industrial revolution will say that's third industrial revolution. I don't know if it's third and fourth have to be distinguished.
Yeah, but I feel that blurriness.
It's the same direction, but then we have 3D printing and then nanotechnology and biotechnology. They tend to call all of them into one fourth industrial revolution.
I think the original article that introduces the idea of the fourth industrial revolution talked about three key the concepts. The author, the founder of WEF, was arguing that the fourth is very different from the previous three in the sense that it's velocity, the scope, and the impact. They're fundamentally, profoundly greater than the previous ones. Do we agree with that?
Okay. Yeah, but I can give you an example, good example. I mean, every time I use my navigator in the car, or every time I get a taxi cab, when I tell the cab driver, to go to some place, and he put the address in, and then we started hearing.
Right.
I mean, the lady is talking to us just sitting behind you, beside you.
Right.
So that's a good example of the the case we get the benefits under the fourth industrial revolution because they're using the physical objects.
Right. And they're telling us what to do.
Yeah, I mean, so the object, I mean, the physical objects, telling us what to do or where to go.
Right.
So that's really a distinguishing factor.
Right. I remember an article that I read recently. They are saying we have now our brains being split. We have a brain inside and we have brain on our hand. And this is inside brain and there's outside brain. And what used to be in here is now here. Talking about mobile phones, right? The smartphones and stuff. So we definitely see greater blurring of the different worlds, digital and biological, I suppose.
But I think the point that controversial point is whether this is truly revolutionary. Now, having access to internet over the phone are fine. But if you look at it, it's more advanced, but it's basically similar technology as a book. A diary,
I see.
Where you record information and that expands your memory. I think the big controversy here, some of the articles mentioned, if you started living from, say, 1850 to 1950, you actually saw the world change. 1850, the best state-of-the-art transportation was railroad. And even that didn't go very far because the network wasn't very far.
I see.
And then in 1950s, we had a complete air transportation network. You can go anywhere in the world.
Right.
But if you look at 1950 to 2000, then, some nice things changed. Smartphones, the navigation, but the fundamental things really didn't.
Professor Yang, with some the sense of joke in mind, I think you're living in a physical world too much, and the world seems to be changing profoundly beyond the boundary of physical world.
What can be added to information is the telecommunication. I mean, because of the development of digital technology, that's something else. And you were saying, is it really revolutionary? It is revolutionary. I mean, it can be revolutionary if it affects our life so much.
Right.
And that would change our life pattern, then we can call it a revolution.
And they are not as visible. We can feel it, but they're not as visible as railroads and highways and stuff, right?
I think the one thing that can distinguish between third and fourth industrial revolution in
Right.
terms of technologies that we still have information technology, and that's for sure same as third and the fourth. But the difference between the two is that the third industrial revolution, we are talking about computers that are fixed in my office or in my home. The fourth industrial revolution
Right.
is the computer that I can carry around
Right.
with me
Mobile.
anywhere I go. It's mobility. It's the wireless internet technology that
Right.
makes a huge difference.
Plus the
And becomes our body when they become wearable.
Exactly.
And plus
Yes.
the extensive use of IoT in the Internet of Things.
Right,
So that's really something different.
Fundamental change there. So Professor Yang has become a minority here, insisting about visibility. But Professor Cho, I have to ask him about technology here. That's what we are talking about, all this advance and all that. But Professor Cho, in actual world today, commercialization of these kind of some of the core technologies, how far have we come? Are there still big gaps between what the thinkers are talking about and what has become actually what's being commercialized at this point? What's the technology gap you see?
I think the now is the beginning. We see just the beginning of the technology being transformed into business opportunities. And you see Uber, for instance,
Right.
it's not allowed in Korea.
Right.
But Uber allows drivers, taxi drivers, to know where the customers are. And it allows customers to know where the drivers are. Both parties, they move around. It's not they're fixed in their rooms because they both have the mobile phones.
Right.
And so the Uber basically connects two moving objects anywhere, anytime. So that's really revolutionary in terms of using that technology in business.
Connectivity that connects fundamental mobility in a way.
Yes.
That's a whole
Yes.
new world,
Yes.
basically.
So
So
Right.
in the
That's
US,
one-
the yellow cap is disappearing.
Right.
Right. So
That's
it's the only way that we delay or avoid that yellow cap disappearance is by policies that prohibit Uber. And
Politics.
That's the politics.
Political
yes.
power of the taxi drivers.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But one other thing we need to consider, I mean, in using an Uber taxi in Korea, I mean, over there, security. Everybody is
Public
registered,
safety.
and then
Right.
it's easy to check them up. Whether.
Right. And then
But here we can't do that, and
yeah, you know,
just so many.
We have also political powers of cab drivers here as well. So
Right.
anyway, but
so I think it has already started, and
Right.
Airbnb and finance, IT, fintech, people call it,
Right.
and that will change. I'll talk more about that in the later, but that will definitely change and dismantle certain industries, something that we take for granted, such as banking, and many financial services will disappear in near future if the politicians do not block it. So I think in that sense, it has already started.
right.
Okay, well, I may disagree about whether this constitutes an industrial revolution, but as far as the technology goes, yes, we should have new industries based on these technologies. And the biggest problem is, as Professor Cho just mentioned, legal and regulatory.
I see.
For example, we talked about one of the technologies that WEF was interested in, digital health. That means watches where you measure your heart rates or so on. And remember when Samsung tried to introduce that technology to Korea? It's tried to sell the wearable watch. And the government initially said you couldn't because it would be classified as a medical instrument, and Samsung could not sell medical instruments.
I see. Okay, so there was a regulatory issue. I was just
Right.
thinking about more of the privacy issue. If you have that device, maybe somebody could get into the system and figure out what Professor Yang Jung-sok's heart rate is and what his blood pressure is. But it was not that. It was more of the regulatory wall.
So we have
Okay.
to get beyond the regulatory wall to even talk about the privacy issue.
I see. So we have a lot of different kind of challenges here. And Professor Yang, we are also talking about the new change making differences in both sides of the economy, don't we? Like on the production side as well as consumption side, right?
Well, I think technology right now has been much more developed on the consumption side. Everybody knows what smartphones are. Smartphones, I know, have improved my kids' life a lot because now they can watch TV anywhere.
Right.
But on the supply side, as I said, there has been some increases in productivity. If you look at case examples, you see cases where the growth went greatly.
Yeah.
But if you look at the total national figures, productivities do not seem to increase all that much. And that's still a mystery.
I think that's the pessimism that I also personally noted in the discussion at WEF as well. I think people are very excited on the consumption side, but the production side, whether they're going to create lots of new jobs, kind of like create a new supply of things that can pull the economy forward, I sensed like people were trying to present more optimistic view intentionally without firm conviction. Professor Kim, what do you see there? The side effects, problems that we see in the coming of the fourth industrial revolution. What do you see?
Well, they are right when they say potentially, there is going to be much of unemployment problem. Because of the fourth industrial revolution, but you can also think it in a different way. In other words, if consumers, have more income and demand more different products,
Right.
and then that will create, the supply. So which
that's right.
will
We're
lead
talking
to
about economics.
right, which will lead to more jobs. So it really depends on how you respond to this new industrial revolution. So even just for the same thing, if you have a positive, attitude towards the change,
Yeah.
and then you don't need to be that much pessimistic with respect to job reduction. But we need to really worry about is the gap, inequality gap may increase. Because those who have skills and talents can really increase their income so much, but those who are behind this revolution or technology don't use at all. They don't even know whether the new technology is existing. Then they just keep falling behind. So there's going to be big divide. So that the government policymakers need to consider and take into account, so that they can make some things about.
That is indeed a big concern. Like people who used to be working in the parking garages and so on, as Professor Cho mentioned, right, they are no longer needed and so on. So
well, if you compare this to, say, the second industrial revolution, what happened there is that there was a lot of increase in demand, and a lot of capital were complementary to labor. So when you set up factories, when you produce new goods, you had more employees to run your factories. But with the third and perhaps the fourth industrial revolution, what seems to be happening is that labor is somewhat being replaced by technology, and the increase in demand so far hasn't been enough to really hire all those people being displaced out of work. And I think that's part of what people are worried about here. We did whether accidentally or deliberately, we did a very good job in absorbing excess capacities in the second industrial revolution, but will it be repeated here in the fourth?
right. From engineering and industrial perspective, Professor Cho, do you agree with what has been said about the concern about the jobs?
Yes and no. First, if we talk about sharing economy, such as Uber and Airbnb, the line between producers and consumers are blurred.
Right.
Because you can be using Airbnb as a guest. You can have your home, part of your home. You become a hotel yourself. And also Uber, you can ride Uber, or you can provide Uber service yourself with your car. You don't have to register as a taxi driver. You can just join Uber as your driver. So that's much easier for anyone to provide services and receive services. So that's one thing that producers and consumers not as clearly divided as before. Having said that, I still think that the first phase of fourth industrial revolution, you will see definitely a lot of dismantling of existing economies, such as I said, think about auto insurance. We are talking about, people are excited about self-driving cars.
Right.
And if self-driving cars become norm, what happens is that it's not just the drivers, professional drivers who disappear, but also there will be no traffic accidents.
That's true. Right. No
Because,
insurance.
Right. So then no insurance is necessary, and then no body shops necessary.
Right.
So it's a white collar jobs that are at risk, and also bank tellers who are sitting in the branch offices. They face customers every day.
Right.
We do fintech and all those transactions taking place on mobile phones. And then even lending, online P2P lending, from person to person lending, it becomes a normal. Then those people will have no jobs to do.
Right.
And then accountants, the economists publish the accountants, the highest probability that they will disappear.
I'm very honored and pleased to introduce the Honorable Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States.
I've been asked to speak Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This fora defines that as change fueled by a digital revolution. Technologies emerging and intersecting at exponential speed and scale, dramatically increasing and improving productivity and economic growth, and creating, God willing, better jobs and entirely new industries. But there are two questions, it seems to me, that we have to address forthrightly at the outset. First, will this revolution actually transform the global economy? And secondly, if it does, will it be for the better or for worse for humanity as a whole?
Platform is a word that can mean different things to different people. At the very least, I think, represented here, we have two kinds of platforms. One is the platform that is foundational to almost everything digital these days, such as the internet. Unowned, no particular CEO who runs it. It just sort of bizarrely runs itself. It's like a collective hallucination. It's wholesale as much as it is retail. It expects other people to build on top of it and other companies. And then we also have as platform a more retail conception and thoroughly owned.
Given that I had seen the power of having creators all over the world create new forms of content, I saw that was important. I became a believer, and I thought it was really important for us to acquire.
And when you book it, basically you're paying Airbnb. We hold your money until after you arrive, so you know it's handled safely. If you need to cancel, something's not as described when you show up, you can call us, get the money back. Afterwards, you leave a review for each other. So in a sense, we've built a platform to facilitate things like payments, reviews, search, but we're actually not the provider of the ultimate service.
We built the platforms that enable these platforms, and you know, this whole, everything we're talking about this week in Davos is something that we've been talking about for about 8 years, and it's just phenomenal to see it come to life.
I think one really important point to point out is we are global. And so when you talk about regulation, you usually talk about it in the context of a specific country.
Yes.
So if we operate in every single country of the world, you have to realize that there are different sensibilities in those different countries.
Yes.
And so one regulatory body also isn't going to meet the demands of every country in the world.
Which I gather YouTube was now back in Pakistan because for Pakistani citizens, there may be stuff they won't see that others would.
Yeah, so we just re-entered Pakistan, which was, it took work for us to get to that.
We would love to see the chapter of that memoir. We owe our panel a huge thanks for taking this really big topic and getting some movement on it. Thank you.
And And the topic that we'll be talking about the remainder of the time is Korea, how ready Korea is here. So first of all, Professor Cho, I'll have to ask you about IoT, Internet of Things, and Korea has been, as a country as a whole, has been excited about this. How far are we? What are we doing? What's happening in general in Korea?
I think IoT, Internet of Things, is basically sensors and mobile phones connected with the wired and wireless networks connections.
It's a part of big data thing, right?
It's an infrastructure, I would say, infrastructure where the data are generated and then sent to the cloud.
So sensor is important.
Right,
connection
is important, and they are all hardware.
I see.
And Korea is traditionally very good at producing hardware, very high quality hardware. So I think IoT itself is a good opportunity for Korea and Korean companies. But the problem is the data itself doesn't do anything.
Right.
You have to process data. You have to somehow find insights and foresights about the world around you. Because the IoT is basically monitoring things that are happening around you. So you have to be able to process the data and then find insights and foresights for better decision making. And that's what the more of a software side, computer science side, and that's or machine learning we call it nowadays, or AI. That's the area where Korea tends to lag behind. Relatively speaking.
Okay. So we are in good shape for hardware, but on the softer side, we have challenges to overcome. Professor Yang, you mentioned the regulations, regulatory walls and stuff, but for Korea, in dealing with this, the wave of the fourth industrial revolution, other issues that you see, what do you see?
Okay, I see two big issues that Professor Cho didn't tell about. One is education. I remember when reading about the third industrial revolution, somebody predicted that what's going to be important is before you didn't have that much information. But with the third industrial revolution, you're going to have an overflow of information, which turned out to be true. So what's going to be important is before you needed to dig up information, but now you don't need to dig up information, but because you have an overload of it, you need to interpret, you need to find what is important. The education goals will have to change, and in Korea, it really hasn't. So that's one problem, that's one major problem that remains. The fourth, we talked about it a bit earlier, the legal and regulatory structure in Korea is not really prepared. We keep talking about creative destruction, which lies behind this industrial revolution. But we want creativity, we don't want destruction. We don't want the people to be displaced. We don't want the existing technologies, the infrastructure to go away. So on the one hand, we're encouraging creativity. On the other side, whenever we come up with creativity, we limit the use of it. For example, the best thing that you could sell over the internet is actually books, because it's a very common, identical good. And in case of Amazon, that's their whole beginning. And you see books being discounted by 40, 50%. In Korea, because it will drive away the smaller bookstores, we limited the discount to 10%. So things like that, where we either knowingly or unknowingly keep from using that creativity in the most flexible and full way as possible, I think it's going to hinder us.
Can you think of some other countries that has done good job in terms of coming up with consensus, collective solutions in the face of fundamental changes and transformation elsewhere?
Industrial revolution, the new industrial revolution we're talking about here. And I would say Germany is a good example. And I mean, Germany has been the country with the technology and industrial technology, and most of the companies are small scale, and they have more than long history, family owned. And they're constantly developing new technology, and they easily commercialize the technology, and they go out and sell the technology or use the technology, making products overseas. At this moment, Korea, I mean, there's a lot of foreign direct invested companies
Right.
operating their business in Korea. They're the dominant group. The majority of the foreign
Right.
companies from Germany.
I see. Well, we are running out of time now, and Professor Yang has raised very important issue about the challenges Korea will have to face, about the culture of destruction, the culture against destruction, and then education, and then what we can learn from other countries. Professor Kim In-chul also nicely mentioned. So I guess the final words will have to go to Professor Cho Sung-zoon in terms of the Korea's challenge facing the fourth industrial revolution.
I think it's very similar to Professor Yang. I think it's government, the policymakers, they have to remove all the regulations to face fourth industrial revolution. It's not a matter of whether, it's a matter of when. It'll come. It has already come to Korea. And then we have a phrase such as shielding the sunlight with my hand.
Right.
And that's very unfortunate situation, and we have to embrace it. We try to take advantage of new opportunities. Remember 2007 when iPhone was introduced, Korean government decided block it for 4 or 5 years and see what happens. The Samsung eventually got over and they sold a large number of phones.
Right.
So we have to embrace it, and then the education. The educators need to figure out what to teach and how to teach to our next generation of students. And the problem is, you remember typists in old days.
Oh yes.
And nobody. Nowadays there are no typists, right? Everybody types.
Right.
And nowadays we have people called programmers. The programmers, computer programmers, who tell computers what to do. But it has to become every kid needs to understand how to order computers to do certain things.
Right. So
with computer programming, and it has to be taught to everyone in school. So it's not a matter of whether your kid goes to Seoul National University. It doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right.
So the new students, the kids have to be equipped with new kind of knowledge and new kind of way of thinking, creative, independent thinking, to face the new challenges.
Right.
Nowadays, in the future, the kids have to compete not against their classmates, but against computers, smart computers.
With those wonderful words from Professor Cho Sung-zoon, we'll have to close our program. But at the same time, while thanking him for these wonderful ideas, we have to also thank Professor Jun-sok for a wonderful perspective, and also Professor Kim In-chul for your wonderful perspective as always. And we hope that our viewers who have joined from all around the world have learned a lot about the overall global trend that we discussed here, as well as also what's happening in Korea and what kind of challenges this country, Korea, has ahead. And for the related reasons, we will continue to talk about these kind of challenges and issues for this country and the issues of concern for the global community as well. So for that reason, our viewers, you will have to come back once again to our program Upfront next time. Until then, goodbye.